Hi everyone, it's Maundy Thursday. That's the first day of the Easter holidays for many of us, and traditionally, in the story of the church, it's the day in which we remember the Last Supper. So, the last meal that Jesus had with his disciples before the crucifixion. And I've been thinking about Maundy Thursday this week, but I've been thinking especially about a story with which St. Mark prefaces the events of the Passion Week. So the Last Supper, the prayers in the Gethsemane, the crucifixion. And that's the story of that Mark places just a couple of days before when Jesus is having a meal, a festive meal, like a banquet at the house of someone called Simon the leper. And a woman comes to Jesus and she's carrying a jar of alabaster of a very expensive perfume, and she breaks the jar over Jesus' head and pours that perfume over his head. And there's reactions, and people go, "This is so expensive. This is a waste. Why didn't they sell? Why didn't she sell this and give the money to the poor?" And Jesus says, "Leave her alone. And she's doing a beautiful thing. It's not like her act is stopping your generosity towards the poor. You will always have the poor with you." And I could talk for a while about this, but what I want to call attention to is something else, is how this woman's act of devotion is profoundly sensorial. She doesn't give any explanation for what she's doing. She doesn't defend herself against the accusations. She just engages herself, and in doing that engages the senses of all those around her in her act of devotion. There is this sound of the jar breaking. There is the perfume running down Jesus' head and the smell that fills the room. And we don't quite know what to do with that. We have made our Christian faith into a very rational thing. It's something we understand, and then we assent to, and if we have the right grasp on the right concepts, then we argue that that we have faith. But this woman gives no argument. She gives this engagement of her body and of her senses, and engages the senses of those around her. And I've been thinking about how a lot of the events of the Passion Week are like that. Another event that we remember traditionally in Maundy Thursday is the washing of the feet, when Jesus unrobes and kneels down, and the disciples can actually feel the water being put on their feet, and Jesus rubbing off the dirt from their feet. And there is the Lord's Supper itself, right? When Jesus doesn't just say something abstract about his death, but he actually gets this bread and breaks it and says, "This is my body, broken for you. Take and eat it." And they do. They eat it. They taste the bread. They take it in. And "This cup is my blood poured for you, the blood of my new alliance." And they take this wine, and they drink it, they taste it, they sense it, and that becomes part of their experience. And then there is also the reality of death, which is sensorial. We conceptualize it often because we struggle to deal with it. But when we're standing on the edge of a cliff, or when we're in pain, we sense it. That fear, that lack, that tightening of our gut. In this time of pandemic, we sometimes conceptualize the reality of death when we talk about numbers and we talk about the deaths and the probabilities. But then suddenly, when it's someone close to us who is in the hospital, in an intensive care unit, then we feel it in our bodies. Or when somebody close to us passes away and dies, and then suddenly the reality of death is very much sensorial. And the Passion Week engages with these realities full on. It's not just a commentary on life and death. It is a profound dive into it with all that it means to us. But what I really wanted to tell you today is why this sensorial dimension of the Passion Week caught my attention today. And that's because today we went to the seashore, to the beach, with my family and with some friends. We decided to meet, or we met outside because that's the only place we could meet, and we met to remember Easter together. And what we did is we met by the seashore, and we brought bread and we brought fish, a whole grilled fish. And we called the kids and we told them about the story, how one of the first things that Jesus did when he rose from the dead was to gather with his disciples, with his friends at the seashore and eat bread and fish together. And of course I know this story, right? I've told it several times and I told it to the kids and that was great. But what really struck me was when we were actually sitting there and eating the fish and the bread by the seashore with this story not just inhabiting our minds now, but inhabiting our senses. And for me, it was a profoundly spiritual experience. And I was talking to another friend later from OiC who said, I miss Holy Communion. And then these things just, they met and I thought, yeah, I miss Holy Communion. I miss being around the table of the Lord, around the altar with you all and break that bread and pour that wine, and we are talking about the body of Christ, we are remembering of the body of Christ, but we are experiencing, we are sensing it, and we are involving and engaging our whole selves with the reality of our faith. And it struck me how that's what we've been missing so much of with this time of pandemic, when we can't meet in person and we can't hear each other's voices when we worship and feel the vibration of the sound and the embraces of our brothers and sisters. But today's experience was an experience of the story of the resurrection. So it was an experience of hope, of faith that is profoundly engaged with hope, and that hope that finds its place even in how we experience the world, not in just how we think about it. And I feel in this time of lockdown, it's been a lot of thinking about things, but also allowing our senses to be involved in that, and allowing our senses to also speak of hope, because our faith is a faith of the resurrected Jesus Christ, of a God who engages profoundly with the reality of our life in all its senses and fears, and breaks and is part of them, but goes beyond them to bring them even into the reality of a new life. It does not shy away from death, but from beyond the reality of death, it is still there, not in some abstract plane, but still there having fish and bread on the seashore, and still there breaking bread and pouring wine every time we share Holy Communion, but also every time you have a meal in your home, every time you sense a smell that reminds you of the beauty of what that woman did to Jesus. I don't know what can bring you hope in these times, but the story we remember this week is a story of profound hope, precisely because it deals with the senses that tighten and create fear. Precisely because of that, it also is able to be present in the senses that bring hope. And I want to encourage you to try to allow that faith to be a part of your experience of the Holy Week, of the Passion Week. When you eat your breakfast and eat your bread, when you drink your wine, when you sit by the seashore, or when you deal with the anguish of fear of death, to know the presence of Christ in those things. And sometimes our act of devotion or act of faith, sometimes it's not about the words, and we can't quite put it into words or wrap our minds about it. But it's about allowing Christ's presence in who we are. And maybe we can't meet in church, but Christ meets us in our daily experience of His grace, of His love, and of His giving of Himself to us in all these ways. So that's my prayer for you, that you may experience Christ's presence in some way. And maybe it will be a prayer, maybe it will be a piece of bread and a piece of fish, maybe it will be a glass of wine, remembering Christ, maybe it will be the embrace of someone in your family. but this week, that hope may come to our homes, whether we are in joy or in fear, that we may know that Christ is with us. So may He bless you, and that you may go in peace and serve Him joyfully.